Namaste, and welcome to our continuing series, Interviews with Disciples and Devotees. Today we are honored to have with us Francois, and I've been reading a lot about you.
Hey.
And so I know a little bit about your traveling with the caravan, but why don't you give us the whole story?
Right, so there were two caravans. So
There were two caravans, yes.
the first caravan in 1969, which started on the 15th of August 1969 in Paris. I was part of that caravan. I had heard about Oroville and Shirobindu from my best friend whose father was the last French governor of Pondicherry. His name was Francois Baron. He had met Shirobindu and he knew the mother very well. So his son was my best friend in those days when I was in Paris. So he told me in 69 that the caravan of cars would start from a place called Oroville, dedicated to a philosopher called Sri Aurobindo. Now, I had no idea about India, no idea about Sri Aurobindo, nor about Oroville.
But you had heard his name only.
No, not at all, not at all.
Oh, not at that
I
point.
was completely ignorant. But I wanted to go around the world. I thought, going around the world would, make a man out of me. I had a very, upper class bourgeois education. I didn't know anything about the world. I felt that I needed to discover myself. So I thought this caravan was the best way to start my around the world discovery. From India, I could go to Thailand, Cambodia, Japan, and come back after 1 year to Paris. So my parents agreed. I was only 18 at that time when I heard. 21 was the legal age. So my parents had to agree to let me go in writing. So there was a leader of the caravan named Vincenzo, of course, whom you know,
very
who
well.
died recently.
Yes. But you must have had very, very wonderful parents to sign.
Not really. They wanted to get rid of me because I was a very rebellious and, difficult child. So I had been kicked out of many boarding schools, expensive boarding schools. My parents didn't really have that much money. So they thought it was also a good way that, I gain experience and come back after a year, finish my studies, become whatever they wanted me to become. So they gave me some money and allowed me to go. And there was a gentleman called Alain Monnier, in whose house the Oroville was. All the meetings happened in his house. So Alain Monnier and Vincenzo were like more or less the two leaders of this caravan, and they were at opposite poles. Vincenzo was a very materialistic guy who liked to drink beer. My mother liked him very much, I think.
Oh, yes.
And Monnier was more of a spiritual guy. So during the whole caravan, there was a tussle between these two, and I was caught in the middle. I was the youngest. So one day, Alain Monnier would put the mother's photo in one of the vans. There were 5 cars, 2 vans and 3 Peugeots. So, and then Vincenzo would take it out, no religion. So it was a difficult caravan, actually. We crossed, it sounds very glamorous today that we crossed, from France to Austria, Germany, Austria, then Austria, Yugoslavia, Greece, Turkey. No, Turkey was a discovery for me. It was a gate. Istanbul was the gate of the East. I was a young Westerner. I had never seen the East, so Istanbul is like I wanted to stay in Istanbul, but as I said, I was a minor. And Alain Monnier had my passport. I needed my passport to stay in Istanbul. In those days, Istanbul was it was a drag center in the world, but a very beautiful place. So I couldn't stay in Istanbul because Alain Monnier wouldn't give me my passport. So I continued with that caravan. So from Turkey, Iran, in Iran we had accidents. One of the cars toppled, stuck in a place called Erzurum, which was a very difficult place. And then Afghanistan was very beautiful. Yes, the Soviets had made the road. So after the very bad roads of Iran, the Soviet roads had made in cement. So it was like, airstrips, and beautiful sunset, very noble people. In those days, they all carried a gun. All the men carried a gun. One night we used to travel by night because the vans were very old and they would hit up and breakdown, so we used to travel by night. So one night we were stopped on a hill. There was a blockade, and there were all these guys with the guns. But of course, we were 15 in that caravan, many men and all young, and so they let us go. Then Pakistan, the Khyber Pass, which is very beautiful, Pakistan. And from Lahore to Delhi, it's a very short journey. It's 7 to 8 hours of car. So we reached Delhi in September '69. Roger Anger was waiting for us. Navajata was there also. So we had meeting with them. I was not interested really. I had tried to reach Aurobindo during the caravan, but it was, for me, it was too much philosophical. But I spent my first night in the Aurobindo ashram in Delhi, that you know, of course. Now it's called the Mother School. It's a huge compound. And it was a very old house, this old ancient type of house with columns and high ceilings.
Was Johar still there?
Yes.
Tara's father?
Right. So he was there also. And there was a photo of Sri Aurobindo and the mother. There were huge photos of Sri Aurobindo and the mother in one of the rooms, and I was very attracted to them. And then I opened the book. It was evening, so it was still in the field in those days. The ashram was still in the field. So there were peasants coming back with their bullock carts, and it was very, very peaceful. And I opened the book of Sri Aurobindo, translation of the Life Divine by the Mother. And in 3 minutes, maybe 3-4 minutes, I had a vision that now I put it in words. It doesn't sound as genuine as it was then. That in this land there was knowledge, that I would acquire knowledge in this land, that I would stay all my life in India, that I would serve India, and that my life was finished. This was home. I had come home. It sounds like words, but
no, but I
was 19. I just turned 19, and it was like, wow, this is home, and there's knowledge here. And in an intuition, I understood what this knowledge was. Reincarnation, the soul, karma. And I put it in words, but it was just a drop, and I got that. And that day I decided, I just come. It was the first night in India, and that I would stay forever there. So then we drove on. There were still 2 weeks to the cars were, the vans were both broken down. So we had 2 of the vans, which was, in those days, the roads in India were very narrow. And as you probably remember, the buses and the lorries will, they will not feed passage. They will come on you, so you would have to move on the side. And it was just us. So it took 2 weeks to reach Oroville. My best friend was a French Moroccan called Mzali Krishna. Mother named me Krishna after that. We had become very close in this caravan. He died also, unfortunately. And Gerard Maréchal, who died just 2 years ago. So we both, 3 of us were very close.
And Gerard was a very close friend of my daughter, Shally.
Yes, of course. Yeah, he was a wonderful guy. Yeah, wonderful guy. Yeah, he was the second youngest after me. And we got very close during the caravan. We were like neutrals. Neither we were spiritual nor were we material. We caught in between. And Krishna was a protector. He was a big black guy, and everybody was scared of him, including Alain Monnier.
This was Big Krishna.
The Big Krishna, yeah.
I knew him very well. He
he
married
was my close
a
friend.
girl.
He remained my close friend for many, many years till he died. Yeah. So then we reached Promise, actually. We arrived early morning. Again, we traveled by night, I think from Bangalore to Promise. We reached early morning. There was Barun Tagore waiting for us, and he took a photo of the caravan, which came out in the bulletin of '69. Oroville was very strange, of course. We had all expected a city, with streets, and there was nothing. There was nothing. There was only raiders. The only road access was from Jeepmare. So after having lunch in Tuskifo, which was on the beach, Purna Premas Tuskifo, which was on the beach then, we had lunch there, and so we came back via Jeepmare and entered Oroville from the Promise side.
Where I lived in Promise,
yeah,
69,
right.
And Piero also.
Okay,
and
Piero and Gloria were there,
also.
Yes, absolutely. So it was very strange. All these raiders, it was glistening in the sun. It was only red earth, there was nothing. We crossed two villages, Elian Chavadi and Kulapalam, which was really a forsaken village, Kulapalam, in those days. You can't recognize it today. There were only few huts, few people. They looked at us as if we were, from another planet, and came to Aspiration, which had been built earlier by people who had come earlier, like Christophe Pitoev.
And Pitoyev and
Pitoev.
Sebastian.
So his brother Sebastian
his
was in the
brother-
Caravan. His brother Sebastian was there. Christophe had flown from Paris. He was actually my Latin teacher when I was 16. He was my Latin teacher. So, and I met him in Paris when we went for all the injections, all the vaccinations, and I recognized him, and oh, you were my Latin teacher. Very brilliant man. So we came to Aspiration. There were a few people there already. Christophe, Claudine. Claudine was there already. Our friend Andrea Babu was there also. He had come a little earlier. These are people who came maybe in 68 or early 69. We arrived on the 2nd October of 69 in Aspiration. So again, very strange. Our first meeting in Aspiration, that very same afternoon, we reached in the morning with Roger Anger, whom we had met in Delhi.
Mm-hmm.
And he told us, one of the first things he said, that the mother said no servants in Oroville. That's one of the first things I remember. And there was a banyan tree in Aspiration. He said, mother said no servants in Oroville. And it seemed, in those days, there were no servants in Oroville. It just evolved. One cannot excuse or understand. It just evolved. But in those days, there were no servants. We would do everything ourselves in Aspiration. So the first months in Aspiration were quite beautiful. There were canyons. Of course, there was the utility canyon. There was another canyon in Aspiration where La Ferme is now. Mm-hmm. And very beautiful sunsets. Oroville was, of course, nothing. There was only palm trees, no trees. You could see the sea from anywhere in Oroville, including Matrimony, as you remember.
Bob and Deborah had come yet?
Yes, Bob and Deborah, we helped them build the dam. That was washed at the first monsoon. They were beautiful people. Deborah was a striking person, and this guy, Bob, was extremely handsome. So they were for us, they were pioneers. Bob and Deborah were there. Francis was there also.
He passed away. Huh?
Yes, Francis was already there, I think, in the Matrimadia camp. Then there was Janet, who died recently. She lived in the Matrimadia camp. And we thought, wow, she was very young and very pretty, this young lady who lived alone in the wilderness.
Yeah.
So there were people there that we looked up to. And of course, we met the mother. Oh, of course, I heard about the mother. People talked about, Vincenzo talked about the mother. Alain Monnier had met her. Few people had met her. There was Stefan, Oropuja's father, probably you forgotten him. He was an Australian guy whose parents were in the ashram for a few years. He was part of that caravan.
What was his name?
Stephen, I forgot his second name.
Stephen.
He's still alive, I think. Mm-hmm. Most of these people have died or disappeared. I think I am the only survivor of that caravan with Bernard Delambre, who called himself Ashaka, I think, nowadays. But he left for many, many years and he came back. So I'm actually the only survivor of that caravan. Yeah. So met the mother.
How many of you met her?
First we met her individually. Before there was this collective meeting that Christophe had arranged.
Right.
We met her. So I met her maybe individually 6 or 7 times before she left. So the first time, of course, was the most powerful one. I didn't know what to expect. As I said, I was very young. I had no preconceived idea. So I have told this story many times, but every time I tell that story, it brings tears to my eyes. So, of course, as you know, one would climb the steps and wait on that terrace next to a room, and there was such a dense atmosphere. It was like a physical thing that hit you. There was a dense atmosphere before you met her. And that first time I met her, Purna Prema took me, and there was only Champaklal in the room. So when I entered the room, I saw this old lady, old band by profile, but such a solid atmosphere. And then Champaklal said, kneel. So I knelt in front of her, and then she raised slowly her eyes and looked at me. And so this was my second second homecoming, and she looked at me and I lost consciousness. Some part of me was watching, but she went so deep and I was so lost that I totally lost. Then they had to take me and bring me down to the Samadhi and ask me if I was okay.
Oh.
So it was an extraordinary. I met her again after that, but I never had such a, because I didn't expect anything. The mind always interferes. Next time I met her, I had expectations, the same experience, the same beauty, the same eyes that looked through you so profoundly, and it was extraordinary. So I met the mother, and again I felt this is my life, this is where I belong, this is where I stay. So I wrote to my parents. They were expecting me back after a year, that I won't come back and this is my life and goodbye. So I kind of more or less cut off with my parents. I was supposed to do my military service because in those days in France it was still compulsory. So I was called for military service. The French consulate tracked me down and asked me to come, and that I had to report in Paris. I don't know when. In those days, Satprem was like a close confidant. He used to sit in the playground on the parapet and look at the sea every evening around 6:30. So I would ask him advice, and he told me, why don't you ask for a medical examination and say that you can't hear. For instance, I had a ear infection in the beginning. So I did, and there was a doctor, a Tamil doctor appointed by the French consulate, and I told him, I can't hear. So he whispered, I said, no, I can't hear anything. So finally, the army was scrapped, which was a big relief because then I had no passport, no visa. It was a big relief. I moved to the ashram, actually. I was attracted to India, to Indians. And I had a difficult relationship with Roger Anger right from the beginning.
Difficult?
I had a difficult relationship always with him, and he felt I was not working enough, which was true. I used to spend my time in the Samadhi in Pondy. I used to sit for hours in the Samadhi, so I didn't do any real work in Oroville. So he complained to the mother that Francois Gauthier is not working at all. So finally I asked Satprem, and Satprem asked the mother, and I was moved to a garden which supplies flowers to the Samadhi called Mare Garden.
I know it very well.
Right, so I lived there for 8 years in Mare Garden. So the mother accepted me as an ashramite. I got prosperity because I had cut off with my parents, so I had no money.
Did you talk to mother? Did she speak to you?
Yes. No, later. But at that time I was accepted as an ashramite, so I got prosperity, I got everything I needed, soaps and shorts, and you know how it was, and some t-shirts and some shirts. And I worked in Mare Garden. There was a gentleman called Parishanda, who probably you know also very well. He was my boss, and he was a yogi.
I've written a homage to him.
Yes.
A book.
Oh, yes, okay.
Yeah. He was my closest
right.
gardening friend.
He used to come cycling every day from his house, from his room, which is near the school, opposite the school, in the back of the school. So every morning he used to come to Mare Garden and give work. So I was very young and I was not such a great worker. But I learned a little bit flowers, and so I stayed 8 years there. This was of course, the first 3 years were like a second childhood because the mother was there. One would meet her. I would sit in the Samadhi. I would sit at the bottom of the steps. I would send her flowers, and Nata had become my go-between to the mother, Italian Nata, and he was a very nice man.
Nata was
a very gentleman.
Good fellow.
So these were the golden years. These were really extraordinary years. I think the happiest years of my life. Then, of course, the mother passed away. And this was a big shock because we were young. I didn't believe that she would die. Innocently, we all believed that the Supramental was there and would manifest in her immortality. So when she died, it was a huge shock for me. Like becoming an orphan. And I had great difficulty I lost that golden years, happiness. And they were still beautiful, the ashram. I was in group by that time. Pranab had accepted me in groups.
Oh.
Yeah, I was in group for 6 years. I was good in sports. I was good in athletics. I used to be one of the, good decathletes in those days. Decathlon was a difficult discipline. So Samadhi was there, my friends were there. I had many friends in the ashram, which I kept today. But the mother had gone. It was a difficult time. So in 77, I decided to go back to France for some time to meet my parents. I have not seen my parents for 8 years, my family. So in November 77, I went back to Paris. Actually, it was a catastrophe. I had left with a difficult relationship with my mother, and it was as if nothing had changed. I didn't feel connected to Paris. I started, so after a month and a half, I came back. And then as I said, I was close to Sat Prem. And in those days, he was very interested in Oroville. There was a revolt in Oroville against the society, which I didn't really live because I was in the ashram still. But I told him I wanted to move to Oroville, so he encouraged me. So I moved back to Aspiration after 8 years. And then quickly, I found an unfinished house in Oroville. Oroville had been built by Roger Anger. There were only 3 houses in those days, and there were some unfinished guest houses which had been abandoned for lack of funds. So I took one of these abandoned guest houses, which was unfinished, and I started slowly building. I had done some journalism and photography before leaving, so I knew a little bit. So I started freelancing as a journalist. First for doing photography. I did a feature on Karere Payat. You heard about Karere Payat? It's a martial art from Kerala, which went with Buddhism toward China and became the Shaolin boxing, what's called Kung Fu. And then toward Japan, and blended in Japan with local techniques, particularly in Okinawa, and became karate. So there's an ancestry of this martial art that the Japanese still recognize. So anyway, I did a feature. I saw a BBC documentary on this Karere Payat, and one of my first features was on Karere Payat for a French magazine. And then slowly I started writing for political magazines, and I became correspondent for a French newspaper called Le Figaro, which is one of the major political daily in France. And I started writing books. So my first input that India was my country, but I would serve that country, was that in my books and writings, I always try to portray India as an economic and geopolitical destination for the West. Not only as a spiritual leader of the world, because this is already happening, of course, after Swami Vivekananda's trip to Chicago, and so many yogis went to the West and brought Hatha Yoga and Pranayama and meditation to the Ayurveda. So this is already happening in a indirect manner, but India, as an alternative to China for the West, as an investment destination, maybe because of COVID it's happening now, it started happening. So in France, for instance, the French don't look at India as an economic destination or as a geopolitical nation of importance. That is a buffer between, the China's thirst for domination, world domination, and Islamic fundamentalism. No, India is that buffer. In my eyes, India is a buffer to these two poles, which are extremes. India is more moderate. It's huge in size. So it is. I have always said that to the French, at least, invest in India rather than China, because India is a democratic country. People love the West there. Wherever they have gone in the West, they have integrated themselves in the West. They pay their taxes. Their children top in university. They're people who CEOs of Google or whatever. People who are wonderful, the Indians. So I started defending India in my books and my articles. And today I have building a museum of Indian history in Pune on a land that was given to me, because Indian history is very important. And Sri Aurobindo spoke a lot about India, about its glory, but also about the difficulties and the invasion that India has suffered since Alexander the Great. So in that museum, I try to portray India from the Vedas till today. So this is a bit my story. India is very important to me, the Mother India, because my first contact with India was Mother India, that in this land there is knowledge. In the physical, I had it 2-3 times after that, once in Almora, we go to the Himalayas maybe twice a year. We wanted to build a house there. Eventually, it didn't happen. So we rent a place or we lease a place. Very high in the Himalayas, there's no electricity, no telephone. So the first time I went to Almora, so one of my friends of the ashram, I had the same experience in Almora, that in this earth there is a radiating knowledge that is still there in spite of invasion, in spite of... I had it in Kashmir and Srinagar also. So I covered the insurgency in Kashmir for quite many years, for maybe 10 years. The worst years when there was curfew all the time, mostly in the valley of Kashmir, of course, because Kashmir, as you know, there's Ladakh, which is Buddhist, Jammu, which is lower and majority of Hindus, and the valley of Kashmir, which is very beautiful, which has a Muslim majority, and also had a Hindu minority, which was chased away in the early 90s. So anyway, I had it in Srinagar also. There was a lot of gunfire, and at night there was curfew. There's a river in... Have you been to Srinagar? Okay, that's matter. Anyway, there's a river that crosses Srinagar called the Jhelum River, famous river. Shlomido went there himself and speaks a little bit about Kashmir. Yeah, he went there with the Maharaja of Baroda to Kashmir. Then some of his letters, he mentions the Jhelum.
Yeah. You said Jumur River.
Jhelum,
Oh,
Ghelum, Jhelum River,
Jhelum.
right? Okay. So my hotel, there was only one hotel open in Srinagar in those days because everything had closed down, tourism had closed down. There was only, fighting between the army and the insurgents. So there was only one hotel open. It was on the bank. It's called the Bund, B-U-N-D. So to stop the river from overflowing, the British built bands, huge. So there is still a band, so the hotel was there. So I would walk at night there. Though there was a curfew, we had curfew passes, the journalists. And then there was all these gunfire. Once I came back at night under curfew, it was a terrible experience. So anyway, all these grenades and fighting happening. And I felt again in this earth, in Kashmir, because Kashmir has been a land of, sadhus and asceticism and yogis. And every yogi in India, since ages, I have gone to Kashmir because it's a very holy place. So I felt again, first time in '69 in the Delhi ashram, then I felt it in Pune, of course, in Almora, and in Srinagar. I felt again that in this land there is knowledge, and this knowledge needs to be protected because it is under assault today. And Sri Aurobindo spoke at length, particularly in Nirod Baran's evening talks, which Puri recorded. He speaks at length about this assault on this knowledge, which was in his time happening, but even more today happening with so many missionaries in India and so much, Islamism, conservatism. And the westernization of India. The biggest danger to India is the westernization of villages where cable TV comes and you think that if you put a suit or the women buy 60 rupees white cream to make them whiter, makes you better people. So for me, it's a very precious knowledge. And so India is my first guru. Of course, the mother is, then I met the mother. She, turned as many of us, because I also did a few interviews of people who met the mother, and everyone in their own words, when the mother looked at them, something happened. Everyone in his own, even the most French, materialistic people, like Vincenzo, for instance, said, and when the mother looked at them, it was like something extraordinary happened. So when the guru looks at you, your life changes. So this is my life. Oroville today, as you know, is under turmoil. There are a lot of questions being asked.
Well, I would
and
like
even
to...
myself, I ask myself many questions.